Let's talk about the Cursus Honorum and Roman magistrates. Once we finally reach the Republican era, the nature of the Senate changes for obvious reasons. This new version of the Senate was, in some ways, a lot more representative than the one we discussed in the previous video. In practice, it functioned as a kind of representative body, and it's possible at this point to begin to think of it as an early version of a legislature, although not quite. We'll get into how exactly it differed in next week's video. The Senate in the Republican era was solely made up of former magistrates. These were all elected positions, which gave the Senate just a hint of democratic legitimacy. However, most of these magistrates were still from noble bloodlines, and the elections themselves were heavily weighted in favor of the nobility. This gave the Senate a much stronger hint of oligarchy. This is another thing we'll talk about in more detail in a later video. It's pretty complicated, but I do want to get into it. As I said before, in order to gain entry to the Senate, one had to be elected to political office. These offices had to be won sequentially in a complex chain of seniority called the Cursus Honorum. This translates as the course of honors, or perhaps more accurately as the race of offices. All of these positions were for short one-year terms. The reasoning behind the one-year term of office was so that it was too short to allow any individual to get too comfortable and to grab power from the Senate. Republican Rome was perpetually terrified of a new king emerging. Note that the reasoning for the one-year term of office is similar to the reasoning used for the 5-day term of office of the interrex during the monarchy. So what exactly did these people get up to in their one-year term of office? Let's get into it with a brief summary of the Cursus Honorum. To gain a Senate seat, you had to be elected to the office of quaestor. You were only allowed to run for this office after you had turned 30 years old. In many ways, quaestors acted as apprentices to the older men wielding the real power in Rome. They did things like assist in the collecting of taxes for governors, or serve as quartermasters for generals, or supervise the physical treasury in the city of Rome. After his 1 year was up, he was formally inducted into the Senate. Next comes aediles. The age restriction for aediles is a little fuzzy, but it hovered somewhere around the mid-30s. The aediles were responsible for the management of public buildings, most importantly temples and aqueducts, management of the city's food supply, and most importantly for one's future career, the organization of festivals and games. The lower classes loved them for this last role. Aediles had 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the Cursus Honorum. 1 foot out because candidates were only sometimes required to serve as quaestors first, and quaestors themselves had the option of skipping this level in the cursus if they wanted to. Aediles had 1 foot in the cursus because it was a prestigious and powerful office that was great for making a name for yourself, and was recognized as an official magistracy by the Senate. But it was not frowned upon if you skipped it. Symbolically, it was different from every other office. Aediles received none of the symbols of command left over from the old age of monarchs. Even lower-ranking quaestors received some symbolic honors. We can get into the specifics of these symbols later because they're also quite interesting. After this rung in the ladder came the real prominent offices. Praetors could be elected around the age of 39. They were responsible for acting as judges, which meant interpreting and administrating Roman law. This was a huge responsibility, and it was one of the main roles of the old kings. They also had the power to call for a meeting of the Senate and to set parameters for the debate. Unlike the previous two positions, this meant that praetors had the power to push a legislative agenda. They could influence the affairs of state in a way that quaestors could only dream. Also, and this is no small thing, they had the authority to command legions, and in this respect only answered to consuls. Becoming a consul around the age of 42 was the ultimate prize of Roman political life. Consuls shared some powers with praetors, such as the power to call the Senate, to frame the debates, propose bills before the public assembly, and command legions. But being a consul was much more than that. It was the crowning jewel of a Roman's professional life. It was a taste of immortality. Even after a consul was long dead, his descendants continued to revere his memory as a testament to the strength of the entire bloodline. Romans didn't use numbered years like we do, but reckoned based on the reigns of the consuls. So you would never say, I was born in the year 690 after the founding of the city of Rome. You would say, I was born during the consulship of Cicero and Antonius. In a very real sense, consuls both made and framed history, since even events like births that had nothing to do with them happened in their year. In practice, consuls acted as the heads of state. Why were they the heads of state? They outranked every other magistrate and could unilaterally veto any of their actions. Nothing happened without their approval. Furthermore, during wartime, the consuls did all of Rome's fighting. They held supreme military command over all of Roman territory. They ruled over nearly every aspect of Roman life that they came into contact with. They also had some broad religious authority, but it was pretty complicated and convoluted, so we can get into it at a later date. That's it. That's a Cursus Honorum. There are plenty of other offices that interacted strongly with the offices I mentioned here, but they were largely tangential roles that were not part of the mainstream political career. The censorship, for example, was a strange office with limited powers that was usually awarded to elder statesmen every 5 years. The tribune of the plebs was a powerful, baffling, self-contradictory snake's bit of an office that even the Romans found confusing. None of these normal magistrates that I mentioned would have even been eligible for it. Another example, the Pontifex Maximus. It was an elected lifetime position that seemed to bring incredible prestige, but arguably no influence at all. In time, we'll get to all of these, but for now, this is a pretty good starting framework. Next week, we'll continue this discussion on the Roman Senate by talking about how it operated under normal circumstances and some of its stranger traditions. Thanks for watching.